All right, hello and welcome to another live sales chat. My name is John Golden from Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine. I'm joined by my colleague Nicole, who is in San Diego looking after the Twitter chat. So if you want to join into this discussion, it's hashtag sales chats. That's hashtag sales chats. And today we're going to talk about sales metrics that really matter. And I'm joined by Jason Jordan, who's a recognized thought leader in business-to-business selling, and he conducts ongoing research into management best practices. And Jason was the publisher of Cracking the Sales Management Code. So hello, Jason. How are you today?
Hey, John, doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the time of year when I'd say a lot of sales managers and executives are poring over data and setting up lots of metrics to measure their year by and look at success. But sometimes maybe they look at too many metrics, maybe they don't look at the right ones. So from your point of view, in 2018, if you had advice for people, what are the right metrics to look at? What would you say?
Well, I think you said two very important things. One is looking at too many metrics, and the other is looking at the wrong metrics. And maybe some of those metrics are the right metrics, but not all. And so, just to speak kind of broadly, I do think that people collect too many metrics, or they report too many metrics. I don't know if you can collect too many, but they put too many into the field. And I think that one of the key values of good sales measurement and reporting is that it gets your team focused on doing the right things. And that's what you want them to do. I mean, obviously, you want to know that they've done the right things. We want to track revenue and productivity, but really the value and effective measurement and reporting is in getting the team focused on doing the right things, right? The inputs to the outputs. We call them sales activities versus business results. And so I think the number one advice from 2018 and 17 and 15 and 2021 and 2047 is going to be really narrow down the reporting that you do to the field and really try to get them focused on the right things to do. And you talk about the wrong metrics, then that kind of takes me to the obsession that sales leadership has with the outcomes, the outputs, right? So what do we report consistently and constantly to the field? It's their revenue, right? Their performance to date, their year-to-date performance, and that's very rear view mirror reporting, right? That doesn't help me do anything better. You can tell me that in January I had a bad month. That doesn't help me in March. That doesn't help me in April. And so I think two pieces of advice. We can drill down into these if you want, but the first is limit the reporting and focus on the things that are important for better sales performance. And then secondly, stop obsessing over what happened and start focusing the team on what they need to do to move forward. And then at the end of the year, you can look back and say, oh, it was a great year. But looking back constantly and going, we're not having a good year, we're not having a good year, we're not having a good year is not. It's not useful.
Yeah, so that's pretty typical with a lot of sales organizations. Monthly, weekly, however they do it, is they look focus on lagging indicators, right? Things, as you say, things that have happened in the past, and say, oh, well, we didn't do well this month, and then kind of look at why, but then don't leave enough time to actually look at leading indicators or how to be proactive. So, what are some of the things that they could start looking at to be more proactive and more forward-looking?
Well, I think you have to, and this is a company by company, even a sales role by sales role answer to your question. They need to be focused on the fact that the sales reps are doing the right things. Right? So, what are the right things? I kind of, as you were talking, I kind of had this image in my head of I like to bring almost everything back to parenting because I think I've learned so much about management, good and bad, from watching my own parenting. And for kids, it's the report card, right? That's the equivalent of, do they make quota, right? Do they meet expectations? Whatever your expectations are, A's and B's or C's. And so, I have this habit of when the report card comes out is when I get all of my energy around managing their performance, right? And they don't make a good grade, so I say, this is not a good grade. But, in between those grading periods, I'm really not focused on what they're doing as much as I am on when the outcome is there, right? So, in the same way that you have to think through each child, so you probably have one child who's struggling with mathematics, then you have to say, okay, now what kind of activities does this does this child need to be engaged in to increase their math score, versus another child that you have, which may be really struggling with science, and you need to really get them focused on, okay, so between now and the next report card that we get, what are the activities we need to be focused on, and let's measure those, right? So we need to just spend 30 minutes a night focusing on math, or we need to spend, once a week I'm going to sit down and review the math with my child, or take the child to school, and so it's the same idea with sales reps and sales performance. You probably have one sales rep who's really struggling to get new clients or new customers. And the activities they're going to engage in to succeed, and the things you want to measure, might be things like volume of prospecting calls, or number of referrals that they're requesting, or whatever the metric is that makes sense in your company. You may have another rep or another role who's really struggling to grow their existing accounts, and in that case, there are different metrics there. It's how frequently they're updating their account plans. It might be the number of buyers they know in different buying centers within the customer organizations. And so the kind of the game here is not to try to find the measurements or the reports that are going to lead to company-wide success. The end game is to be a coach, and for frontline sales managers and their managers to identify, okay, where are the pockets of success? What roles do we have in place? Where are people struggling? And I think that's when you can really become an effective user of sales metrics, which is to say an effective coach, when you identify, okay, here are the things that are important this year or this quarter or this month, and therefore here are the expectations I'm going to set with my sales team, and here are the things I'm going to measure to make sure that those expectations are being met. It's with reporting especially, we fall into this trap of what's the best report? Let's just build the best report and let's make sure everyone has access to that report, and then things are going to go well. And in reality, it's not that way. Different sales roles, different parts of the organization need different metrics. And so it's a constant battle with your desire for simplicity and being able to manage with one approach to the complexity, but the power of addressing people or roles individually.
So when you're looking at individual salespeople, right, and you're analyzing, where their strengths or weaknesses, or where they need help or whatever. So what you're saying basically is that when you identify, say it's call planning, say you see a sales rep who hasn't been doing call planning very well, right, and you start to coach them on call planning, the leading indicator then of success for the future is the fact that they start call planning properly, right? And then you see the results of that, hopefully in the weeks and months to come, right?
That's right. And let's not put all the measurement on the sales rep. I think there's also a huge opportunity to measure sales management and their behaviors as well. So let's take that. It's a great example. I think it's one that resonates with a lot of people. My sales reps aren't advancing calls, or their prospecting calls aren't fruitful, right? So we need to engage there. And so maybe one thing is the volume of calls they're making. That's the easiest and most traditional thing we look at. But your point of call planning is getting to the quality of the calls, right? So maybe we can adjust the volume up or down, but how do we really improve the quality of the calls? And so that would be, let's do call planning. But I'd also say there's one there for the coach as well, or the manager, which is to say, we're going to meet once a week and review your next 3 calls, right? Or we're going to meet every afternoon and review one call plan that you're going to make, one call you're going to make the next day. And so when you start thinking about, getting the right volume of calls, and then improving the quality of the calls through planning, and then improving the volume and quality of coaching, if you're measuring those 3 things, then I think you're probably going to get better calls, right? You're going to advance more deals, you're going to win more opportunities. So there's, the idea is, pinpoint what it is you want to change, the behavior or the outcome, and then come at it from a bunch of different directions, right? We want to measure it, we want to coach it. Maybe there's some training that person could attend to become better at making calls. And that's when change really happens, is when you don't just say, I'm watching the number of calls you're making, or I'm watching how many of your calls are advancing. The real change comes when, look, let's really focus on the quality of your sales calls. And we're going to do a number of things, right? We're going to have you ride along with some other people that are great at sales calls. We're going to send you to some training. We're going to coach you. We're going to do call planning. And then, it's almost impossible that it doesn't improve if you do all those things and measure them, make sure that, they're happening as expected.
So that's a different approach to the way obviously a lot of organizations are set up, because let's face it, a lot of sales organizations, the sales manager, the sales executives are constantly being handed from above for those reports, right? The reports.
Sure. All organizations.
All organizations.
Yeah.
And so it's a it's a balancing act for them, right? Where they have to obviously provide what's required upstairs, but also then figure out how they're going to invest their time more wisely in doing the things that you just talked about. So, do you believe that there's still a long way to go in many organizations to understand what the real role of the sales manager should be, rather than him just be a kind of middleman who's reporting on the numbers?
I think there is. It's funny. So we train sales organizations. We train sales management teams. That's what we do for a living. And so we have the privilege or challenge of working with a lot of different organizations. Right? You're the same. You're the same. You talk to a lot of different sales leaders, and and it's really interesting the different perspectives organizations have on their frontline sales managers. In some organizations, and in some ways, it's exactly inverse. In some ways, the more performance-based the organization is, which is to say more aggressive they are about performance, the more the sales managers tend to take on a compliance-based role, right? So that the sales reps are doing what they're supposed to do in the right volume, and that the reporting is done, and that the forecasts are updated, the data is in the system. It's almost as though when you try to turn up the performance of the sales force, you turn the sales managers into administrators, which is exactly the opposite of what you want to happen. In other organizations, they really understand that if you want to affect change in any way, if you want to implement a new CRM tool, if you want to implement a new sales process, if you want to improve performance, like it has to go through the frontline sales managers. And in those organizations, they really view the sales manager, the frontline sales manager, as change agents. And they try to rely on the systems to do the reporting and the administration and the compliance stuff, which is why you had the systems in the first place. And they really try to push the sales managers to get more involved. And you know what I mean when I say more involved, right? Not even necessarily in the field more often, but more engaged with the salespeople and trying to influence their behaviors and their thinking. And so it's an interesting cultural thing, and it is almost organization by organization the way the role of the frontline sales manager is defined. And of course, that manifests itself in what reports they're giving, what data they're expected to provide, the frequency of that data being reported. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that plays into the measurement as well, but it all kind of comes down to what's the expectation of the sales manager's role.
So, so say you get that expectation right. There's still the other part, isn't there? I mean, as you alluded to earlier, is the sales manager still has to convince the sales rep that these metrics or measurements that they're putting in place, maybe I'm putting them in place for you personally, but they're good for you as well as me, because let's face it, when anybody puts measurements in front of somebody else, our first reaction is, oh, so you're going to measure me on that? There's a kind of bit of a visceral reaction to having measurements put on us, even though we know, they should be there. So how does the sales manager help the salesperson understand the benefit of the measurements that he may be putting in place here?
Yeah, it's kind of funny when you talk about when measurements are put on us. If you watch television, you can't help but see an ad for a credit reporting agency, right? Credit whatever, and you get your free credit score, and that's kind of the reaction that every person gets when someone, oh, here's your score, here's our evaluation of you, right? You're like, wait a second, I pay my bills. No matter what your score is, you think it's unjust unless you had the absolute perfect score. And so it's the same way when sales reps are handed a set of metrics and go, so here's how we're going to judge you, right? This is what we think good looks like, and this is what you're to comply with. And I think the key, and this always kind of comes back to coaching in my mind, but again, think about the population that we deal with, which is sales managers. It all comes down to how you set those expectations. And so I'll give you an example. So you could come to me and you could say, Jason, I want you to make 8 prospecting calls this week, and we're going to measure that. And, we're going to maybe even weave it into your compensation plan, whatever. Like, this is the expectation, what you're going to do. Okay, well, now I feel like I've just been given my credit score, and you're going to hold me to that. Or you can sit down with me and go, hey, Jason, look, it just looks like you're not getting where you want to go. I want you to succeed. You want to succeed. And it looks like it's not happening. So what are we going to do here? And I say, well, I guess I need to probably focus on acquiring some more customers. Like, okay, well, how many more customers might you need? Well, at least one a week. Okay, well, what do we need to do to get that to happen? Well, I probably need to do more prospecting. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I should probably make 6 or 8 more calls this week. And then, okay, well, let's try that. Let's try it for a quarter or 6 months and see what happens. And that's coaching, right? When you gain buy-in to the measurement, it's different than just enforcing compliance. And so it's a little Pollyannish. I understand that every sales manager is not going to sit down and coaching is hard and it's time consuming, and it's easier to go, look, I just want you to make 8 calls. It's kind of like, again, taking it back to our children examples. If you walk into the kitchen and your daughter's made a mess trying to bake cookies, you have 2 options. You can just say, this is a mess, and you can clean it up for them and say, this is how you bake cookies. Or you could say, wow, looks like you're in the middle of something here. Explain to me what's going on, right? And then you kind of walk them through the process, and it's easier just to demand compliance and to fix the problem. And so that's the struggle that sales managers really have. But to answer your question, if you can gain buy-in to the metrics through some level of coaching, then they own the metrics as much as your CRM and your leadership owns them. Pollyannish, I know, but we can hope. We can hope.
Yeah, we can hope. But I mean, it's interesting because what you're saying here also is almost to start a little bit differently, right? Start at the result of the outcome we're looking for and work back, rather than saying, right. Jason, I need you to do 8 more prospecting calls this week, as you said. You say, want you to get, an additional customer appointment this week, or prospect appointment. So starting at that and then almost collaborating on working backwards to, you may end up arriving at 8 prospecting calls in the end, or 10 or 20, who knows? But you started at a different place where you both kind of agreed what the outcome should be, right?
That's right. Well, it is about reverse engineering, and that's what we do, except we do it in an unproductive way. We say your quota is $2 million. Go do that. Right? And so we kind of put the burden on them to reverse engineer what that means. A more thoughtful way is, your quota is $2 million. We can all agree to that, right? Okay, well, so how are we going to get there? Are you going to acquire a bunch of new customers? Are we going to grow your existing accounts? Are we going to cross-sell and upsell, into our territory? What are we going to do? And then based on that, you go, okay, well, then now we got to figure out what we really need to do, which is make calls or do account plans. So I think we reverse engineer it. We just go straight from, here's your quota, you go figure it out, to here's your quota and let's figure this out. And so I think that's where we see the most effective sales management. And that's where reporting, again, has the most impact, is where you can focus on the things you need to be doing, measure those, and course correct along the way.
In your experience, having worked a lot, with sales management groups and worked on, obviously focused a lot on metrics, are there any measurements that you think are really important that are often overlooked or not used as much?
Well, I think there's almost no measurement that's not collected on salespeople. Again, my perspective is there's not enough measurement of sales managers.
Right.
Someone asked me, it's probably been a year or 2 ago, if there's one metric in the sales force that would make a difference, what would it be? If you could just collect one thing. And my response was, you should survey the salespeople regularly and ask them the question, are you receiving enough coaching from your sales manager? Mm-hmm. That's it, right? And I think what you'd get is most salespeople wish they had more coaching. Sales managers want to do coaching. It's not like sales managers avoid it. They just have too much other stuff. And so I think if there are metrics to be put in place, it's probably around management. How much time is management spending in meetings with sales reps? How many reports are management demanding? How much time are sales people spending meeting management expectations? How many hours are managers coaching? I think those are the I think we measure salespeople plenty. We know the number of calls, we know the number of new customers, we know the average deal size, we know the close rate, we know. So I think you could be more skillful with how you use them. But
I think that gets back to that fundamental issue that we've discussed before, and I think probably we'll be discussing for a long time to come yet. And even as we talked about earlier in this call, is about the expectation or the understanding of what a sales manager should be, right? And as we know, the sales manager should be a sales coach a lot of the time. That's where they can really bring value. But a lot of them are never, they're not trained for that position. They're not trained how to do that. They're not shown how to do that, and they're not given the space how to do that, right?
Yeah. Well, I can walk in any organization. I was speaking to a group of 200 managers the other day at a sales kickoff, and I said, I've not met any of you, but here, I bet this was your career path. You're a very successful sales rep.
Yeah. And
then you got promoted to be a sales manager. Congratulations. And then you're generally ignored, right? From a training, from a enablement. I mean, all the tools, all the training are mostly pointed at salespeople. And it makes sense, right? You want the salespeople to be better, train the salespeople, enable the salespeople. Sales managers are a little neglected in most organizations. There may be a leadership course or a coaching course, and those may be the same leadership and coaching courses the rest of the organization gets. The managers in finance get the same thing, managers in operations. And so and we have a dog in this fight. So this isn't a completely square answer, but sales managers don't get taught to do the things they're expected. I mean, what sales manager gets taught to manage a pipeline? What sales manager really gets taught to forecast? What sales manager really gets taught to use CRM to be a better coach? They get taught to log into CRM. They get taught what a pipeline is and the expectations for reporting it. They're told that they want accurate forecasts, and they're told how to log into the system. But we expect sales managers to do a lot of important things. We don't prepare them to do it. We just kind of assume since they've been around a long time and they were successful sales reps that they'll be successful sales managers, and it's not the case. Our most recent research, which was done over the last couple of years, and a lot of research demonstrates this. Half of sales reps aren't making their quota, right? And that's sales manager's fault. It's not the salesperson's fault in our mind. And so, even the most successful, most tenured sales manager, if you look at how successful their sales reps are, a lot of times it's not very. I mean, they'll have one or two or three that are really knocking it out of the park, and that sometimes carries the load. But if you look at the number of sales reps that are making their quota, it's not a lot, and it's not a lot higher for more tenured reps. Tenure has a very tenuous relationship to sales rep success in our experience.
And it's kind of interesting because, like you said, most of the career path is great salesperson. Next move is sales manager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at sport, I mean, sport's always a good, analogy for these things. That best players don't always make the best managers. We've seen that in many. I mean, in the kind of football I follow, as in soccer, where some of the best managers, in fact, some of the top managers in the world, were at best average. Sometimes not even that. Not even average. Some not very good players themselves, but they went on to be fantastic managers because. And the reason why often is because when their playing career was over, or when they weren't making it, they focused on taking coaching badges, learning how to coach and becoming coaches. Whereas your top players, well, they don't tend to focus that way. They tend to stay in their career and then go into management without actually learning any of the craft. And I think there's some of that similar here because, as you say, the transition point tends to be, Jason, another fantastic year for you. We're promoting you to manager. You're now the regional VP of North America.
That's right. Well, you almost have no choice in some ways. You can't have someone coaching your football team who's never played football. Right? You can't have someone coaching your salespeople who's never been in sales. But because there's the reality, they have to coach to certain activities. They have to. And you're not going to take your least successful salesperson and promote them to manager for a number of reasons. First of all, you can't trust that they understand the process. But secondly, they're not going to have the respect to manage and coach. Right? I mean, especially if you promote someone bad inside an organization to manage people who are good, it's never going to happen. But there's a threshold that you have to get to with understanding. And then the thing is, you can succeed as a sales rep if you can do one or two things really well. And it's not always the same one or two things. In one situation, you may have a salesperson who's just really empathetic, asks a lot of questions, is really smart, and solves problems. You may have another sales rep who works really hard and is good at prioritizing their time. But you can succeed as a sales rep if you're good at one or two things and you're focused at. But when you're a sales manager, it's almost like a jack of all trades role. Right, you have to be part-time IT director. You have to be part-time coach, part-time finance director. With compensation plans, and I mean, the diversity of what you have to do to be a coach is much greater than the diversity of what you have to do to be a great salesperson, whether it's natural talent or whatever it is. And so you can't promote a bad performer. But you don't necessarily have to promote your top performer either. You need to find someone who you almost need to. It's almost like you're hiring for a new position. Yeah. You need a different set of evaluation tools because the role is so broad as a sales manager, as a good sales manager.
And then I think the other part of it is that coaching needs to be taught, right? It's not something that people naturally have. I mean, people think they have, but I mean, we've seen most people's idea of coaching is, here's how I do it. I'm going to tell you how you should do it, and it's the same way as the way I do it.
Right. Well, and when you're promoted, that's almost the implicit. That's what you're being told, right? You were a great sales rep, so to make you a manager, so you can make these other sales reps great. And your reaction is, well, I got promoted for a reason, right? This is what I did. This is what made me successful. This is what I expect to see. I mean, it all makes sense. It's not, there's nothing that's illogical about any of the way we do things. It's just not the right way to do things, right? I mean, there's plenty of things that make sense that just aren't the right things to do. And so, we're kind of we're fighting a lot of inertia. We're fighting a lot of history. But the companies that are enlightened kind of understand this. It's actually kind of funny. We could have this conversation with any organization, but then only a handful will actually change something when we finish the conversation.
Yeah. Well, I've always said that about training, and the sales training in particular, is that if you lined up 100 CEOs in a row and said, how many of you think training is important, 100 would put their hands up. And then if you said, okay, well, how many of you have, a lot of budget for sales training this year? You might be lucky if 2 of them put their hands up.
No, and if you ask them how many have a lot of budget for training their sales managers,
nobody.
Maybe no hands go up. All sales managers are critically important. I mean, they really drive. Oh, okay. Well, how much have you invested in them in the last 5 years? Well, yeah.
Well, they went to the sales training seminar we had a few months ago, that 2-hour seminar when we brought in somebody.
Yeah, the reps got trained all day, and the managers got 2 hours after that on how to coach to the thing. Which makes sense. Why wouldn't you do that?
As we're coming to the end here, I think then one of the key metrics I hear coming through loud and clear from this conversation is around coaching, and I think maybe changing the conversation from, as you say, how are we measuring salespeople to how are we measuring sales managers, and putting coaching in as a key component of that. And if there was a key metric that you measured this year, would be how often do your managers coach your salespeople, and then you could say, and then how do your salespeople put into practice the things that they were coached on?
Yeah, we have a wonderful piece of data from a client of ours. They asked the sales managers how much time they were spending coaching, and it was roses, right? I mean, they were spending so much time coaching. Yeah. Then they asked the salespeople how much time they were getting coached. It was completely different. By an order of magnitude, it was different perception, because sales managers think if they spend 6 hours in the car with the sales rep, they just coached for 6 hours. The salesperson thinks they just got interrogated for 6 straight hours. And so I do think measuring the amount of coaching time is important, but measuring the perception of the coachee, who's the customer in this situation, right, is critically important. It's like getting customer feedback from your customers, but it's getting customer feedback from on your coaches. So it's So themes of the conversation: get your sales reps focused on the right things, measure that, but not everything else, and get your sales managers doing the right things and measure that. And if you do that in 2018, you'll be ahead of the game.
Perfect. All right, Jason, this has been great. Before we go, there's a couple of things. Do you want to tell the viewers what is the one thing that you do every day to set yourself up for success? What's the Jason Jordan power tip for today?
Well, the tip is always the same. It's focus on doing the most important things. Prioritization is the most important thing that I do to succeed. And at the point that people contact me inside my own organization and say, well, you told me that you were going to do this last week. And I was like, well, that was more important last week. This week, something else is more important. Right? And so the idea of just focusing on the important stuff. It's the same for me. It's the same for you. It's the same for salespeople. It's the same for athletes. Whatever it is. Just, I always tease that I have 10 things on my to-do list, and the bottom 6 never change. The top 4 just keep rotating, and that's the way it should be. Right? That's the way it goes. So just focus on the right stuff.
Yeah, because remember, at the end of the day, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay, and before you go, just tell them a little bit more about yourself and your organization and how they can contact you.
Sure. So I'm Jason Jordan. I'm a partner with a company called Vantage Point. We train and develop sales leadership teams, sales managers. We work with large business-to-business companies primarily. If you have a lot of managers, you have a lot of salespeople, and you're a big company, right? And so I'd encourage folks to visit our website, which is vantagepointperformance.com. We have a lot of resources. We have a resource center there that has tons of video and blogs and stuff like this, on topics like coaching and pipeline management, forecasting and metrics and CRM. And so we've tried to build a nice resource there for people who are interested in these management topics.
Great. All right. Well, we've hit the end of the sales chat. So, listen, I want to thank everybody for joining us. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine, Pipeliner CRM. And thanks again, Jason, for joining us today. Hope people take on board the advice and set yourself up for success in 2018. And thanks also Nicole, who has been looking after the Twitter chat. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, John.